my son was hailed by all of Vienna, not only as a great pianist, but as one of the greatest and most controversial composers of his time. But I saw it first. I nurtured that talent in him. I had helped him become what he now was.
On a stormy evening in February 1785, the elite of Vienna gathered to hear a new work from Austria's leading virtuoso pianist, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. The importance of what lay within this masterpiece was known to only one man, Leopold Mozart, the composer's estranged father. I believe Mozart is the greatest composer of all time. The popular view was that he was born a genius straight from his mother's womb. But in my opinion, his brilliance grew and developed from the loves and losses during his brief 35 years. Life was the driving force of his genius. In this series, I want to discover, helped by the true accounts of those who knew him firsthand and following in his footsteps, how Mozart's own suffering and joy created music so powerful that it captivates the listener today just as it did that first audience more than 200 years ago. Mozart was born into a musical family. His father Leopold was the author of a famous manual on violin playing and deputy director of music to the Archbishop of Salzburg.
What do you think the outcome will be, Herr Schenk?
I can assure you, Herr Mozart, the Archbishop is delighted with your composition. I heard him say so. And that his violinists will have to study them closely by Ascension Day.
Leopold's family was small but close. Maria Anna, his wife, for whom he'd been disinherited for marrying beneath his station. His daughter, Nan Earl, herself an accomplished keyboard player. And little Wolfgang, 4 years younger and the apple of Leopold's eye.
My little brother had a passion for knowledge. His tasks occupied him completely. For example, when he was doing sums, the table, chairs, walls, even the floor were covered in chalk figures. One day my father came home from work and found Wolfgang busy scribbling away. He must have been about 4 at the time. Papa asked him what he was writing. "A keyboard concerto," replied Wolfgang, "and I've nearly finished the first part." Papa was, needless to say, very dubious as to this assertion, but he had a look at the manuscript.
That evening when I asked him to play me something, I knew immediately that my life was now in servitude to something as rare, sounds poetic, I grant, as rare as when the moon blots out the sun. Let's hear the subject. God had given him to me in his great mercy. The answer. It was my duty from the moment he began to play to ensure that my son's sacred music brought joy to the world.
From the beginning, his father was terrified by the boy's fragility. The boy was particularly disturbed by harsh, discordant, excessively loud sounds. So to make sure that this wonder, this miracle of nature, was not deterred by such sensitivity, Leopold asked me to sneak up on him unawares with my trumpet. When I blasted him from behind, Wolfgang's face drained of blood, and to his father's shock, the boy quite fainted.
Aware of his son's sensitive condition, Leopold's excitement remained undiminished. As a composer himself, he already recognised that the boy was writing something of real value. If Leopold could secure release from his duties in Salzburg, he would have the chance to transform his family's fortunes.
Does not do to keep his grace waiting.
Finishing his scores. He's waiting. I've been working through the night and the night before.
Leopold was desperate to share his son's talents with the wider world, but his duties to the Archbishop remained an obstacle.
Mozart. Ah, my scores. Wonderful. I understand you wish a leave of absence from your duties here in Salzburg.
Your Grace, my son Wolfgang has a gift, sacred in its singularity. It will be your discerning taste and perception that would be admired far beyond these city walls. Should myself and my family be given your blessing?
It is not my name, but that of Salzburg that should, most probably will benefit from your efforts. Godspeed.
Your Grace is too generous. Too generous.
It must have seemed like the most terrifying enterprise for Leopold on that day, the 9th of June 1763. His whole family, these two gifted children, 7-year-old Wolfgang and his musically talented sister Nannerl, leaving Salzburg and striding out into the unknown.
The adventure is beginning!
It was, I think, the make or break for Leopold, testimony perhaps to his great sense of self-belief.
Take care of those instruments, some of them are very fragile. The only thing
He had to provide for everything.
Look after this for Wolfgang, he'll be very upset if...
Servants, horses, carriages. He engaged the services of a Mr. Winter to act as their hairdresser and valet. They needed clothes to impress, and perhaps most expensive of all, a carriage and 4 horses. He was risking everything on the talent of his own small son.
Wonderful feeling that morning. Escaping Salzburg had to be the best thing for my son. Only by his inhaling, how can I put it, the scent of a better class, feeling the adoration of 1,000 upon 1,000, could his musical education take flight. It wasn't luxury, but then how cosseted were the ancient Greeks aboard their trireme, with our loyal servant, Mr. Sebastian Winter, at the helm to guide our voyage. This truly was our Odyssey.
Driving as I am across Central Europe, I can only marvel at the enormous distances that the Mozart family had to traverse. But that being said, Leopold had picked the perfect time for this great trip. The 7-year war had just come to an end. It had been a particularly bloody conflict where all anyone could do was watch their back and look after their own. But now, with peace across much of Europe, the aristocracy in particular were able to enjoy themselves again and to throw money at entertainment.
He's all of 7. How can a little mite of 7 impress us? Come and sit on my lap, you little monkey. Come along. I shall stroke your hair. He's so tiny, just like a doll.
Play for the ladies, Wolfgang.
Oh, you poor little thing. So delicate. But can you see the baby calluses?
I have just the thing. Here, Poppet. Try lanolin. It works a little miracle on my gardener.
Oh, what a peculiar little boy. He's from some frightful little town in Austria. I understand he has the ability to play blindfolded.
Ah, how remarkable. Well, if he wants his supper, he shall have to sing for it.
When the tiny Wolfgang was asked to play, what most astonished his aristocratic audience were his powers of improvisation. He'd be set a challenge, usually in the form of a bass line, something like that, and then he'd have to immediately come up with a complete piece of music based on that. So, 1 minute, maybe he'd do... 5 minutes later, he'd come up with something completely different. And apparently, the seasoned composers of the day, the great musical minds, would come in one by one and challenge him to an improvisation contest. And several hours later, they'd stagger out, exhausted and spent. Mozart would bounce off the stool and say, "Any more?" As Wolfgang travelled through Germany into France, the invitations to play flooded in, and Leopold reaped the rewards. Snuff boxes, silver pens, gold pocket watches. The family was swiftly elevated from humble tradesmen to special guests at the royal courts of Europe. Wolfgang's imagination was stimulated by meeting the great musical minds of the age. All this attention had quite an impact on his image of himself.
I worried about Wolfgang. He always seemed to be lost in a world of his own, quite detached from reality. Of course, when he shared his imaginings with me, I was happy. He invented a land which he called the Kingdom of Bach. It had everything for good and happy children, and Wolfgang was king of it all. He asked the coachman to draw a map, and he would dictate the names of cities, market towns, and villages. In this world, Wolfgang would sit on embroidered cushions and dispense treats and favours to the children of his land. Sometimes I think he spent more time there than in the everyday world.
This little boy became a superstar because of his musical powers, which many believed were supernatural. Some said Wolfgang was the creative spirit of God, embodied in the most innocent of creatures. Others gave him more political powers, that here was a symbol of a new egalitarian age.
Extraordinary, mental, spiritual prowess enshrined in the body of an infant. My son was unquestionable proof of new, enlightened beliefs that talent could be given to all, not confined to a special class.
But the everyday world of travelling musicians was dangerous and grueling. In the warmth of my car, I can't begin to experience the cold and wet that forced the Mozarts to wrap their children's feet in felt and bury them beneath the straw that lay on the carriage floor. And deprived of fresh food, the family became malnourished and sick. As months turned into years, Wolfgang had to learn the hardships of life. Winter stiffened bones suffering from rheumatoid arthritis, and fever left him deathly sick for 2 months. But illness wasn't the only problem. The coach itself began to buckle under the strain.
Bastian! What do you see, Frederick?
How did Leopold justify a project that resembled not so much a heroic Greek odyssey, but a travelling circus with its prize freak for hire?
I wasn't only a father and a teacher, but a missionary. What was my advancement at court compared to my divine task? Showing those who were beginning to doubt that miracles did exist.
In early 1764, the Mozarts even crossed the perilous Channel to perform to an expectant English public.
Ladies and gentlemen, silence, please. The greatest
prodigy that Europe, or even human nature, can boast of is, without contradiction, the little German boy, Wolfgang Mozart. A boy, 8 years old, who has, and indeed, very justly, won the admiration of not only the greatest men, but also the greatest musicians in Europe.
Leopold rented a theatre in Soho, selling tickets at 10 shillings and sixpence, about £40 today, to those eager to hear the boy who had charmed mad King George himself. In the duets, Wolfgang would play the lower role, whilst Nannerl was given the more seemly higher octaves. Little Wolfgang can't help showing off his compositional skills with all these trills and playful little scales. But in its uplifting warmth and lightness in feel, you can hear his rapid strides from his early works and sense the greater things to come.
Ladies and gentlemen, to your delight and wonder, the boy will now play a concerto without sight of his own hands.
But there were also those deeply suspicious of Wolfgang's true abilities. The English authorities appointed a jury to assess whether Leopold was being truly accurate with his claims that such extraordinary compositions came from the head of an 8-year-old boy.
I was charged with submitting tests to the Royal Society. I have to say I had doubts as to whether the father was being truly accurate with the boy's age, although he certainly had a most childlike appearance and disposition. My report to the Royal Society stated most emphatically that his execution was amazing. The scale clearly preponderated on the side of Mozart, and that he was as worthy as our own Handel of receiving the title prodigy.
During this 3.5-year grand tour the Mozarts made, Wolfgang learnt an enormous amount. He found how to charm and entertain princes and kings, Louis XV, George III, and also how to transfix a crowd. And one of the things I love about Mozart is that even in these formative years, his music was for everyone. Eventually, he returned to Salzburg a much more complicated child, and Leopold wrote about this with a mixture of trepidation and defiance, as well he might. Childhood has the power to entrance. I sometimes think that Leopold was a dreamer of almost impossible dreams, in that he hoped by sheer belief alone that he could render childhood eternal.
difficult time. Things were not going as I'd planned. All of Europe marveled at my son. But in Salzburg, his great merits went unrecognized. He should, at the very least, been offered a post as court composer, but I would sooner trust a horse trader, a soothsayer, a mountebank, and one of those seething, envious, backbiting nobles of the court.
Most beloved and esteemed Signor, I beg you to tell me what you think of my humble music. We live in a world where the arts should be encouraged, so that we may enlighten one another. But in the country where I live, music must struggle even to exist.
This grand piano that I'm playing on here is really quite a lot like the fortepiano upon which Mozart composed his piano concerto in B-flat when he was 20. The fortepiano was very much his instrument. There had been an enormous revolution in keyboards and keyboard design leading up to this point. There'd been the clavichord, a small domestic instrument where the string is struck but the sound is tiny. Then the harpsichord, the string is plucked, but very little potential there for expressive colour. And then there was the fortepiano, which by the 1770s was undergoing a revolution of its own in terms of the way its action was designed. It meant that now you could play the same note repeatedly in a way that you hadn't been able to before. Also, the sound, the depth of expression and possibility was growing all the time with the instrument, and Mozart seized on this. But here, in this B-flat major concerto, there is actually a sense of being hemmed in, of constriction in this music, which must have been very much how Mozart felt being stuck in Salzburg.
If I'm truthful, my son's temperament contributed towards his frustrations in trying to obtain a permanent position. My son was brilliant, but he could not temper himself. In 1771, a new man came to power in the bishopric, Hieronymus Colloredo, who was less sympathetic to the aspirations of my family.
I've always imagined Archbishop Colloredo as rather a narrow, conservative man, jealously guarding his own fiefdom. But in fact, he was a great supporter of the Enlightenment, and he had portraits of two of its heroes, Rousseau and Voltaire, on his study walls, which from time to time he had to cover up in order to avoid offending some of the more conservative burghers of Salzburg. The picture the Mozart family paint of him is obstructive and bullish, unwilling to embrace their grand design. You have to have some sympathy with him, though. They'd returned to Salzburg, having in their eyes conquered the world. He was paying them a perfectly honest salary. Why should he bend his will to their every desire?
Oh, Father, I bet you a kreutzer that you can't hit our musical friends from Italy.
I'm perplexed at their newfound ascendancy in the diocese. Their playing is sodden with sentimentality.
Signor Baldoni has been silenced.
I'm serious. The theatres are closed, our concerts curtailed, the mass is shortened. Our prospects don't look good.
Your Grace, most worthy Prince of the Holy Roman Empire, my father begs you to allow us to travel for a few months in order that we can make some money. You refused to grant such leave. Our situation is pressing, and you object, my gracious Prince and Lord. My father has dedicated himself to my education, and I owe it to him to lighten his burden.
So the court musician wishes to dictate when he plays and when he doesn't. And do they really think that I believe that this is written by the son and not the father? So they wish to seek their fortunes elsewhere. And so they shall. Tell Mozart the younger that he may travel, but that I'll not have the treasury drained by the father's absence. Frau Mozart can nurse the boy.
Mozart's liberty was a blow to Leopold. At 21, he'd flown the nest. Frau Mozart was ordered to spy on his every move.
Did I tell him to take the straight road from Salzburg to Mannheim?
Yes, you did, Father.
Does he know to approach Munich from the east?
Yes, he does.
Because the bridge has collapsed. Perhaps it is my fault, his lack of worldliness. I have done everything for him, trying to give him the freedom to concentrate. Exchanged money, found horses, lodgings, practically wiped the crumbs from the corner of his mouth. How can he be expected to obtain a position without my help? If he fails, everything is lost.
It seems as if the more distance Mozart put between himself and his father, the more he dallied and avoided employment. Mozart had tasted freedom, and he had a novel supply of excuses for why hard cash wasn't being sent back to Salzburg.
No money, but another fine gold watch. What one needs on a journey is money, and now I have 5 of the things. I'm seriously thinking of having an additional watch pocket on each leg of my trousers, so that when I visit some great lord, I shall wear all my watches, and then it will not occur to him to present me with another one.
Mozart had more pleasurable distractions than begging a position. A year into his journey, he experienced a new sensation: sex. Before long, he was bedding his cousin Maria Tekla and writing her letters that were explicitly coarse. And then, on reaching Mannheim, Mozart met a 16-year-old singer and fell in love.
That's it. Mademoiselle Aloysia Weber sang 3 arias to me. Excellent. As far as the singing is concerned, I would wager my life that she will bring me renown. She has greatly profited from my instruction. We will go to Holland and then to Switzerland. You, Father, must do everything in your power to get us to Italy, where I can write opera and she will sing.
Examine yourself, my dear Wolfgang. Millions have not received the tremendous favor which God has bestowed on you. You are confronted with far more dangers than those millions who have no talent. What a responsibility, and what a shame if such a genius were to founder.
Beautiful.
Leopold now dedicated himself to tearing his son from Aloysia. As he saw it, his whole life's work depended upon it. Classic parent behaviour here, I think. Father sensing control of his son slipping through his fingers, so he goes off the deep end. And there's an amazing letter he wrote on the 11th of February 1778, which is a torrent of anguish, self-pity and threats. He orders Mozart to Paris, claiming that he'll be otherwise utterly forgotten by the world.
Yes, I told him he risked being captured by some woman and dying, bedded on straw in an attic full of starving children. What else could I do? If you'd have been a father, you'd have done the same.
So finally, worn down by his father's protests and chronically short of money, Mozart left the very next day for Paris, thereby breaking off his relationship with Aloysia. Now, you might think it was easy enough to dismiss that as some kind of youthful fling, but I think that'd be very wrong. Mozart experienced, as far as we know, for the only time in his life, something we've all probably experienced, real heartache. Arriving in Paris then, desolate and raw, confronted by some of the worst rain the city had seen all year, Mozart was entering into a new, dark period, which would ultimately change the nature of his music forever.
My dearest father, I have some very distressing news for you. My dear mother is very ill. She has been bled, but complains of shivering and feverishness. The doctors give me hope, and we must remain calm.
It was typical Fulfil. Even with my mother lying dead before him, he still wrote to us of his hopes that she would recover. He was trying to protect us, I suppose. He asked close friends to be on hand for Father when the sad news reached Salzburg. Despite everything that happened, I'll always remember how he tried to protect Father when Mama died.
When I found out what happened, I blamed him for taking my wife from me. Maria Anna had borne me 7 children, 2 of which survived. By the grace of God, the love she had for 7, she gave to 2. Lost in his own world. He did not care for her. He took her from me.
There can be no greater expression of the suffering that Mozart was experiencing than in his A minor sonata, which he wrote after his mother's death. This marks a huge sea change in his compositional style. Things could never somehow be quite the same again. Firstly, the choice of key, A minor. Musicians up to this point had always viewed minor keys as being somehow imperfect and unstable. And so it's very significant that Mozart chooses a minor key, and particularly A minor, which has a dark and very stark quality to it. Also, there's an enormous sense of contrast through the piece, so that you get pianissimo butting up against fortissimo, very soft against very loud, in a way which simply had never been seen before in a keyboard sonata. And then in the third movement, you get these enormous leaps that the pianist has to accomplish. It's like Mozart is struggling to keep things off his mind.
And the way he ends the movement is so abrupt and unsatisfactory, charging forward, sort of beyond the buffers. But it's in the slow movement, the middle movement, that I think we really get the key to this piece. There's something outwardly simple about it. Almost, well, certainly from my point of view, as if it's daddy music. It's about his father. It's about the sense of separation from his father, the umbilical cord being ripped. And you get these extraordinary juxtapositions of colour which create a deep sense of torment.
In early 1779, Mozart returned to Salzburg and the watchful eye of his family. After such freedom, how caged he must have felt, once more a lowly court musician.
As you know, Wolfgang and I were now employed by Archbishop Prince Colloredo of Salzburg. I despise the man. Be that as it may, things came to a head in 1781 when the Archofer, which is what we called him, decided to visit Vienna, bringing an entourage with him, including Wolfgang. It's a shame that I had to stay in Salzburg. Perhaps I could have restrained him. But a man of 25 years ought to know when to keep his temper.
Not brook such impertinences. Mozart must be quartered here so we can keep an eye on him. There's the conceit and arrogance of his father. Mannerisms unwelcome in those who peddle themselves around Europe like travelling beggars. The elder is of little use in my employment. Small wonder that none will take on the son. You will ensure that he sits where station requires, beneath the valet with the cooks. We should put an end to such is of station.
We are here in Vienna, and Colloredo will not allow better terms. The inhuman villain. Oh, that's what he is. A villain. I am seething with rage, for twice already he has said the greatest sotties and impertinences to my face. He called me a rascal and a dissolute fellow, a cretin. Oh, I do not want to write to you all the things he said. Finally, as my blood began to boil, I said, "So your Highness is not satisfied with my service?" "What? Are you threatening me?" "You cretin. There is the door. I don't want to have anything to do with such miserable scum anymore." At last, I said, "And I don't want to have anything to do with you anymore either."
These letters from Wolfgang are completely wild. You cannot accuse the Archbishop with all sorts of insults and abandon our private code. It's his intention. He knows the Archbishop's spies open all the letters. Even now, they're rubbing their hands, gloating at his downfall. He has thrown away his only paid employment and willfully endangered my position.
Mozart came with his letter of resignation. I refused to accept it. It was his duty to get his father's consent before such an action. He then rounded on me and my steward, the good Count Arco, shouting that he knew his duty to his father better than we did, and that he would be very sorry if he had to learn it from us first. So Arco got him by the neck and kicked him well and truly up his backside out of my office.
You say that I have never shown you any affection and therefore ought now to show it for the first time. You add that I will never sacrifice any of my pleasures for your sake. To please you, I would sacrifice my happiness, my health and my life, but my honour, that I prize above everything.
We had constant rumours about Wolfeld's behaviour in Vienna. Drinking, womanizing, creating all kinds of scandal. My father was quite tortured by it. Me, I just thought, yet again, little brother inventing the rules for himself. If only I had gone to Vienna, I would have calmed him down, helped him to live a more ordered life. I wanted to be with him. But father still needed me in Salzburg, and he never requested to visit. He was too proud for that. But I knew what was going on in his heart.
On the question of Colorado, it was unthinking, disrespectful to me. That's all I have to say.
This was a decisive moment for Mozart. Free from Colorado, he was free from his father. At last, he had the chance to unleash his almost obscene powers of creativity in the most exciting city on earth. Vienna in 1781 was a bit like Berlin in the 1920s. It was the place where musicians and artists of every hue were flocking. Also, there was a new emperor, Joseph II, who called for freedom of speech, an end to censorship, and was busy building a whole new social landscape where anyone, regardless of background or breeding, could become someone.
Mozart now threw off the trappings of his provincial past. He developed a taste for the latest fashions, smoking, billiard playing, and spending beyond one's means.
I now have a beautiful red coat. I was so captivated by its splendour that I did not take note of its price. It would do justice to certain buttons which I've long been hankering after. Mother of pearl with a few white stones around the edge. Why is it, I wonder, that those who cannot afford it would like to spend a fortune on such articles, and those who can pay do not do so?
Renting rooms from the mother of Aloysia Weber, he hadn't far to travel for extracurricular entertainment. But it wasn't the recently married Aloysia who took his fancy, but her younger sister, Constanza.
Dearest father, you remember Aloysia? Well, the middle Weber daughter. Dear Constanza is the martyr of the family. She is the cleverest and, in short, she's not ugly. But not really beautiful. She has no great wit, but enough common sense that I love her, and she loves me with all her heart.
Signed, I suppose, your Apollo of a son.
Treachery! This is how I react to treachery! Betrayal! My own flesh and blood! How could he agree to such an arrangement? To marry this girl within 3 years or pay her money for the rest of his life?
Papa kept the archive, all Wolfeld's former work. and would only release copies one at a time if he asked. It was right that he administer such control.
Oh, he must take me for an idiot. This Constanza Weber is clearly a prostitute and a guardian, a pimp, a panderer, a low peddler of dank flesh.
The Mozarts are unjust. It's true that my mother and guardian drew up such a document, but I was shocked to see such preconditions. I called Wolfgang to me and asked directly whether he loved me. He said yes, he did. And so I immediately ripped the document in two.
If I had my way, she would go down in history as the woman who corrupted my son, broke up my family. And my dearest Nunneral, who stayed ever by my side, she shall have whatever riches I leave behind.
My brother wrote to me protesting as to how there can be such monsters in the shape of my father, and that he would write to him and call him worse than the devil, and that he would marry Constanza Weber with or without our papa's consent, which he did, and my father and I, no, we never forgave him.
His father's consent was withheld until after the wedding. He was torn apart by it. And the feelings came out in other ways. I saw all the suffering, the pain, and the guilt.
By now, Mozart had experienced an intensity of emotions which he was able to draw from and pour into his piano works. I believe it's his experience of life that gave him the ability to capture in music the sense of what it is to be human. Music where joy and pain can be experienced at the same time with equal intensity. Here's a composer writing not just to fulfill a commission, but out of great spiritual inner need.
Dearest Wolfgang, Father refuses to release the music you have asked for. I'm sorry, but he is really very upset. You must think of him also, of all the years of sacrifice.
It's only on reading these letters that I realised just how painful the split was between Leopold and Wolfgang. They'd had the most intensive hand-in-glove type father-son relationship. The great irony is that following the break, Wolfgang became exactly the entrepreneur that his father had always been. He set about promoting himself in Vienna as the leading concert pianist, planning not one but 20 concerts which people could subscribe to.
And the word is that the music itself is shockingly passionate.
Give it here, I'll sign it.
Oh, no, I want to sign it.
I tell you, I am the senior here.
Oh, age
I insist
before
on
beauty,
signing
go
it. Thank
on.
you very much indeed.
He is, I'm told, the most extraordinary player. The music is most complex and abstract in form.
Too many notes, the Emperor said. Quite enough to make your head spin.
What do you think? Doing everything himself. Not only writing and performing, but playing the businessman.
And these concerts are not in theatres. No, they're in the open air. And in casinos.
Mozart's new subscription concerts were an astounding success. They were the must-have tickets in town. Anyone who was anyone wanted to be there. He was also attracting a broader audience, the newly empowered middle classes. This was gripping music, which spoke directly to its public, a public that was already falling over itself to hear this great new athlete of an instrument, Mozart's redesigned forte piano, an instrument that was capable of taking the orchestra on equal terms in full-blooded dialogue and debate. And so by harnessing the great potency of this new instrument, coupled with his own creative brilliance, Mozart created the modern piano concerto. It's this enormous energy that pulses through Mozart's masterpiece, the D minor. He barely completed it before travelling through the streets of Vienna, followed by the instrument itself. Awaiting with anticipation was none other than Emperor Joseph II himself. But there was someone more important who planned to be there that evening.
Wolfgang and I had not seen one another for nearly 2 years. But I could resist it no longer. My son was hailed by all of Vienna, not only as a great pianist, but as one of the greatest, the most controversial composers of his time.
All Vienna has heard of the concert. You must be very proud. Perhaps I may glimpse the young maestro when we arrive.
No, he won't be meeting me. The truth is, he does not know what time I'm arriving. A little surprise.
As Leopold sat listening, the music he heard defied convention.
There's a new confidence here, which you hear right from the start, this incredible, audacious and weird opening. Normally when a composer starts a piece of music, he lays out his stall with the big tune, but this is a non-tune, shows supreme command. The entry of the second theme comes as a real surprise. We've been here, then new key, and now he ratchets up the harmony, raising the blood pressure. Another remarkable thing about this concerto is the writing for the woodwind. They too have achieved emancipation, a sense of liberation. Listen here to this real dialogue between the oboe and the piano. There's a great childlike simplicity to this theme which opens the second movement of the D minor. It's of the nursery, but laced with nostalgia. It's like an adult looking back at their childhood, and that sense you have as a child of placing yourself completely in the arms and the love of your protector, your father. as ever with Mozart, there's a contrast. The floor falls away from the nursery and we're suddenly in a nightmare, a tantrum, a huge conflict between the orchestra and the soloist, between father and son, neither prepared to give way, a realization perhaps of just how far Wolfgang and Leopold's relationship had moved apart. Texture and colour saturates the third movement of the D minor. Mozart working at a white heat of compositional complexity.
Here he is, decades ahead of his time. To me, this has all the torment, fire and passion of the greatest composer of the next generation, Beethoven.
It's extraordinary just how much Mozart can make the piano and all his mature music echo our lives. He plumbs the depths of his own experiences, both great and tragic, and has to write music which expresses it. As such, I believe he is the first great musical romantic.
The concert was magnificent. I had the great pleasure of hearing so clearly all the interplay of the instruments that from sheer delight, tears came into my eyes. When he left the platform, the Emperor called out, "Bravo, Mozart!"